The day Anna arrived at the estate, the sky pressed low and gray over the hills, and the wind seemed to circle the old mansion with a secretive intent. The house, a sprawling Gothic structure of blackened stone and strangling ivy, sat hunched at the edge of the world, its windows staring blankly over a garden that throbbed with a strange and restless color. She had not known her Aunt Miriam well, only distant whispered stories about a peculiar woman who lived alone and wrote letters in spidery script, always sealed in envelopes that smelled faintly of earth. The inheritance had come as a surprise, and with it, a sense of obligation that Anna could not quite explain. A pull, like the faintest of threads drawing her here, away from the city's indifferent noise to this place where silence grew thick and expectant. There was something about the garden that unsettled her from the first. The wrought iron gate creaked open under her hand, revealing paths overgrown with a wild profusion of flowers, blooms of shapes and colors she could not name, petals flushed with bruised purples and feverish reds, leaves that curled as if trying to whisper to one another across the gravel. The air smelled not of sweetness, but of damp soil and something faintly metallic, almost like blood. As she walked, Anna had the sensation that the garden was watching her, that every flower swayed not in the wind, but in time with her heartbeat. The estate's caretaker, a gaunt woman named Mrs. Greaves, had offered only the briefest of instructions, her mouth tight as she warned Anna to keep to the main paths and to never tend the garden after sundown. Yet curiosity and a strange sense of kinship drew Anna deeper among the flowers, whose beauty was at once intoxicating and repellent. Her first night, Anna lay awake in the vast, unfamiliar bedroom, listening to the house settle and sigh. The wind pressed against the windows with a voice like distant crying, and in the garden, a faint rustling rose and fell, rhythmic and almost musical. It was not until the second night that she realized the sounds were not caused by the wind, but by the flowers themselves, soft, almost human sighs that seemed to echo her own restless thoughts. She stood at the window, staring down at the moonlit beds, and felt a chill move through her. Each blossom appeared to pulse with a secret life, petals trembling as though caught in silent weeping. The longer she watched, the more she sensed the garden's mood shifting in response to her own. When she felt a pang of loneliness, a cluster of blue flowers drooped, their heads bowed in sorrow. When unease pricked at her, trumpet-shaped blooms shuddered, emitting a faint, keening moan that set her teeth on edge. If you're feeling the chills, subscribe for more scary stories. Days passed, and Anna found herself drawn outside each morning, compelled to tend the garden despite the discomfort it inspired. Her hands grew stained with the soil, her nails caked with dirt that seemed to cling even after vigorous scrubbing. She tried to focus on the simple tasks of pruning and watering, but the garden was never quiet. It responded to her presence, mirroring her emotions with unsettling precision. On one particularly gray afternoon, as rain threatened and the clouds churned overhead, Anna wept for reasons she could not name. The garden answered with a cacophony of sighs and low, mournful wails. The sound so raw and real, it left her trembling. Enjoyed the story? Hit like and share with someone who loves a good scare. What began as fascination turned quickly to dread. Anna noticed the flowers had developed a hunger for her attention, their colors growing more vivid, their stems reaching toward her as if straining to brush her skin. She dreamed of their roots, thick and pale, winding through the dark earth like clutching fingers, binding something unseen deep below the soil. Each morning she awoke exhausted, haunted by the memory of voices pleading and crying out, a chorus of longing so profound it seemed to echo in the very marrow of her bones. Despite her growing unease, Anna could not leave. The mansion and its garden held her fast, bound by forces she did not yet understand. In the oppressive hush of twilight, as the sun slipped behind the hills and shadows thickened, she felt the weight of countless eyes upon her, unseen but utterly present. The boundary between dream and waking began to blur, and Anna sensed that the garden was far more than a legacy. It was a living thing, ancient and ravenous, and it wanted something from her. Anna's growing compulsion to nurture the garden began to warp her understanding of trust and reality. She started noticing details she could not explain. Small tokens buried in the flower beds, a child's cracked porcelain doll head, a silver locket with initials she didn't recognize, a weathered photograph half swallowed by moss. Each item seemed to radiate a quiet sorrow, as if it mourned its own presence. The housekeeper, Mrs. Greaves, remained elusive, answering questions with cryptic warnings or abrupt changes of subject. One evening, Anna caught her outside, standing motionless among the azaleas, eyes shut, humming a tune that made Anna's skin crawl. The sound was oddly discordant, as though echoing from a wound in the earth, and when Anna approached, Mrs. Greaves's smile was brittle, her gaze slipping past Anna as if she were already fading into the twilight. Comment what you think will happen in the next chapter. Soon, Anna's perception of time began to fracture. Days bled into nights, meals were forgotten, and her sense of self seemed to unravel at the edges. The garden dictated her routines. She would awaken with the urge to check for new growth, or to rearrange stones to please unseen whims. At times, she caught glimpses of movement just beyond her line of sight, a pale hand brushing through the leaves, a flicker of shadow slipping between hedgerows. The boundaries separating her thoughts from the world outside thinned, and she found herself speaking aloud to the flowers, coaxing them with soft reassurances or pleading for silence when the night pressed in too close. Meanwhile, the estate's isolation became more pronounced. Letters she sent to friends remained unanswered, and her cell phone, once a lifeline, lost all signal. Even the few villagers she encountered in town avoided her eyes, muttering about the old curse and crossing themselves as she passed. This social estrangement, subtle at first, soon became absolute. Anna felt herself drifting, the world outside growing hazy and irrelevant as the garden's reality asserted itself with relentless authority. Each night, the house seemed to contract, hallways narrowing and doors sticking, as if the mansion itself conspired to keep her contained. This story still has so much more. Subscribe so you don't miss out. Adding to the mounting paranoia, Anna began experiencing auditory hallucinations that bled into waking life. She would hear her name whispered from distant corners, or the faint sound of weeping carried on a non-existent breeze. The patterns of the wallpaper started to resemble faces, their eyes wide with silent accusation. Even her own reflection turned unreliable, a stranger's expression flickering over her features when she paused at a mirror, lips moving in time with thoughts she did not remember having. These disturbances grew in intensity, culminating one afternoon when she stumbled upon an old leather-bound journal hidden in a locked drawer of Miriam's writing desk. The journal's pages, stained and brittle, chronicled a litany of confessions and rituals. The script was frantic, sentences tumbling over one another in desperation. Miriam wrote of bargains struck and debts paid in sorrow, hinting at a power beneath the garden's roots that demanded constant tribute. Now, Anna's unease solidified into a gnawing certainty. She was not simply a caretaker, but an unwilling participant in a cycle older than the mansion itself. The garden's hunger seeped into every aspect of her life, warping her dreams, her memories, and the very language of her thoughts. Thus, what began as an inheritance had twisted into an isolation so profound that Anna could no longer distinguish where she ended and the garden began. The estate, once a place of possibility, became a crucible for dread, every pathway a silent corridor toward some unspoken doom. In this space, trust dissolved, and the only certainty was that she was being watched, not just by the flowers, but by all the lost voices that clung to the soil, eager for her to join their silent ranks. Do you dare to watch until the end? Subscribe to see what's next. In the days that followed, Anna's sense of self began to erode in ways that defied logic. Not only did the garden exert a strange pull on her thoughts, but she found her own body betraying her. Tremors in her hands when she tried to hold a trowel, a tremble in her voice that made the air feel charged with static. More perplexing, however, was the gradual emergence of memories that did not belong to her. She would be seized by vivid flashes, a child's laughter echoing along the hedgerows, a woman's panicked breathing as she stumbled through dew-soaked grass. Each vision so immediate and sensory-rich that Anna could almost taste the coppery tang of fear on her tongue. These impressions arrived without warning, fragmentary and invasive, leaving her gasping for breath as if surfacing from deep water. Leave a like if you can't take your eyes off the screen. Simultaneously, the garden's uncanny responsiveness shifted from subtle mimicry to open manipulation. Flower petals would stain her fingertips with colors that lingered for hours, impossible to wash away, as if marking her for some private inventory. The air thickened with an unnameable scent, something rank and sweet, reminiscent of decaying fruit left in the sun. And Anna noticed that birds and insects avoided the grounds entirely, leaving a hush so absolute that her own footsteps seemed unreasonably loud. The silence pressed in, amplifying the slightest sound. The faint snap of a stem underfoot felt like a gunshot, while the rustle of leaves overhead became a cacophony of whispers, each one threading into her mind with insidious precision. Unexpectedly, the mansion itself began to reveal a different side, one that seemed to pulse with its own intelligence. Doors that were once locked now opened onto passageways Anna did not remember, leading her to rooms filled with artifacts caked in dust and neglect. One room in particular was lined with mirrors, each pane warped, reflecting not her image, but the garden beyond, as if the glass itself had been imprinted with the estate's secrets. When she peered into these reflections, Anna glimpsed movement. A procession of shadowy figures drifting between the flower beds, their faces blurred, their hands trailing through the blossoms as though searching for something lost. Each figure exuded a silent despair, a yearning that pressed against the glass and threatened to spill into her reality. As Anna delved deeper, she uncovered a weathered ledger tucked beneath a pile of rotted linens in the attic. The entries chronicled decades of names, each accompanied by a date and a cryptic note, sometimes no more than a single word: regret, betrayal, mercy. These notations, scrawled in different hands, painted a grim tapestry of the garden's purpose, a ledger of debts paid in flesh and spirit. This discovery reshaped Anna's perception of her own role. She realized she was not merely a caretaker or an heir, but perhaps the latest in an unbroken chain, each link forged by desperate bargains and irreversible choices. The weight of this knowledge settled in her gut, cold and heavy. If you're scared too, hit like and share with your friends. Adding to this mounting sense of unreality, Anna noticed that her dreams were no longer private sanctuaries. Each night she became a silent observer to a tableau of suffering. Women and men pleading for release, children clutching at her skirts, their mouths open in soundless screams. When she awoke, she found traces of soil beneath her fingernails, petals crushed beneath her pillow, and a sense that something vital had been extracted from her while she slept. The garden, it seemed, was no longer content to respond to her emotions. It had begun to feed upon them, siphoning her strength to fuel its own uncanny bloom. Want more stories like this? Subscribe now and prepare for the worst. Now, consider how easily boundaries can blur when one's environment begins to dictate the terms of existence. When Anna attempted to assert control, refusing to enter the garden, barricading herself in the library, she was greeted by a sense of suffocating futility. The house creaked and groaned as if resenting her defiance, and the very air seemed to thicken, pressing her toward compliance. In this way, Anna was forced to confront not only the garden's appetite, but the realization that her own will was being methodically eroded, replaced by a hollow compulsion to satisfy the land's insatiable hunger. Beneath the surface of Anna's unraveling world, a sinister choreography unfolded, one that demanded participation from forces both living and dead. The garden, no longer a passive vessel, began to assert a will of its own. Roots broke through the flagstones in the dead of night, rearranging the layout of the paths so Anna would lose her bearings, even in daylight. What had been familiar groves shifted subtly, so treasured landmarks vanished overnight, replaced by alien, gnarled thickets. These physical distortions of space were mirrored by distortions in Anna's cognition. She would set out to reach the sundial at the heart of the garden and find herself inexplicably back at the gate, hours lost, hands trembling as if she'd wandered in a trance. This dislocation bred a gnawing paranoia, as if the land itself delighted in misdirection, her own intentions rendered moot by a consciousness far older and far more cunning than her own. Building upon this, Anna's encounters with the supernatural deepened in complexity. One evening, as dusk bled into full darkness, she witnessed an apparition, a translucent figure veiled in rotting funeral garb, gliding between the foxgloves. The entity paused, its faceless head tilting toward her, and in that instant Anna felt a wave of despair so profound that it nearly dropped her to her knees. The apparition's presence was not threatening in a traditional sense. Rather, it exuded the aching futility of a soul denied rest. Thereafter, Anna found herself haunted by phantom sensations, the icy brush of invisible hands against her cheek, the weight of breath at the nape of her neck, and the faintest echo of her own voice whispering from behind closed doors. Each manifestation suggested an intelligence seeking connection, but only ever in ways that heightened her isolation and dread. Notably, the garden's influence began to erode Anna's ability to distinguish between the animate and inanimate. She observed the way the flower's stems twisted with intent, sometimes entwining around small objects she dropped, other times appearing to recoil from her touch as if in pain. More chillingly, Anna noticed that the faces of those she had seen in her visions began to imprint themselves on the petals. Faint, sorrowful visages, mouths agape in an eternal silent scream. The garden, it seemed, was not content with merely housing its captives. It paraded their torment, transforming beauty into a grotesque tableau of suffering. If you found this mystery intriguing, don't forget to comment and share. As this awareness deepened, Anna's relationship to the garden shifted from caretaker to adversary. Driven by a desperate need for answers, she began to conduct her own experiments, testing the boundaries of the garden's power. She pricked her finger on a thorn and watched as a crimson bloom erupted overnight, its color mirroring her blood. She whispered a secret sorrow into the earth, and by morning, a new shoot had appeared, its leaves trembling with a grief that was unmistakably her own. Each active interaction was met with a reaction as if the soil itself was an alchemist, transmuting emotion and flesh into botanical form. This reciprocal exchange blurred the line between sacrifice and symbiosis, raising the chilling possibility that the garden's sentience depended on a continual infusion of human essence. Another crucial layer emerged as Anna began to sense a hierarchy among the trapped souls. Some flowers radiated a resigned acceptance, their colors muted and still. Others pulsed with agitation, petals vibrating with contained fury or terror. The more time Anna spent observing these differences, the more she realized that certain blooms seemed to exert influence over others, commanding the wind to shudder their neighbors, orchestrating a morbid display of collective lamentation. The garden, then, was not a single entity, but a society of lost voices locked in perpetual negotiation, each jostling for dominance or release. Now consider how this revelation would infect every action with uncertainty. Every step Anna took, every word she muttered to herself might be twisted by unseen judges. She became hyper-aware of her own thoughts, afraid that even a fleeting wish for escape might be seized and made manifest in some cruel botanical form. The garden's manipulations forced Anna to confront a new dimension of terror, not just the fear of physical harm or spiritual corruption, but the horror of being known, utterly and inescapably, by a presence that thrived on her innermost secrets. Reflecting on this journey so far, one cannot help but sense the inexorable momentum that has gathered, a tide pulling both Anna and the reader deeper into a domain where boundaries dissolve and every certainty is quietly eroded. With each passing moment, it is as if the garden itself is not merely a setting, but a sentient labyrinth, its unseen corridors folding in upon themselves, guiding its captive toward a destination mapped by hunger and memory. The air hangs thick with expectancy, the unseen roots below writhing with secrets that refuse to stay buried. Here, the ordinary scaffolding of reality no longer holds. Instead, a living architecture of dread rises, rearranging itself in response to the trembling of human hearts. In light of these insights, the path forward is less a walk along a trail than a navigation through a shifting fog, guided not by reason but by intuition and dread. The interplay of seen and unseen, of what is whispered and what is screamed, becomes the silent engine driving all things to their inevitable convergence. Each choice, each hesitation, carries a gravity that is felt more than understood, as if the very air is charged with consequence. The notion of agency slips away, replaced by a realization of having been woven into a design that precedes understanding and will outlast resistance. The garden's power, its ability to refract suffering and desire into forms both beautiful and grotesque, seems now less a curse than a revelation of what lies dormant in the darkest soil of the self. As we pivot towards the final reflection, it becomes clear that every encounter, every haunting detail, is a thread in a greater tapestry whose pattern only emerges when viewed from the threshold of transformation. The uncanny logic of this world asserts itself with relentless consistency. Here, grief is as tangible as stone, yearning as inexorable as the turning of seasons. The mansion and its grounds, once imagined as a sanctuary or inheritance, reveal themselves instead as a crucible in which human identity is tested, reshaped, and ultimately claimed by forces indifferent to hope or despair. Shadows that once lingered at the edge of perception now crowd close, their intentions unreadable, their patience infinite. Drawing these strands together, we see that Anna's ordeal is not simply a matter of external threat, but a reckoning with the porousness of selfhood, the ease with which longing and regret can be harvested and transmuted. The garden's silence speaks of debts that cannot be repaid and bargains struck without consent. Yet within that silence lingers the possibility of a final metamorphosis, one that is neither escape nor absolution, but a surrender to the truth that some doors, once opened, will not close again. The anticipation that builds is not for triumph or redemption, but for the moment when the last illusion falls away and the full shape of the legacy is revealed. As the last vestiges of daylight bleed from the sky, the estate holds its breath, awaiting the final turn. The garden, lush with the accumulated weight of unspoken sorrows, stands ready to gather what remains. In this suspended hush, the reader is invited to step closer, to peer beyond the veil, and to prepare for the reckoning that waits beneath. The surface, where every root is a memory, and every bloom is a soul poised on the edge of release or ruin. In the end, as twilight bled away and Anna's last defenses crumbled, the garden revealed its final, inescapable truth: that every boundary between self and world, memory and root, sorrow and blossom, was always more porous than anyone dared to admit. The flowers had never been content to merely mirror her emotions. They had drawn from her the deepest currents of longing, fear, and regret, weaving them into the living tapestry that now pulsed beneath the soil. As she knelt in the dark loam, hands trembling and slick with earth, Anna finally understood that the garden's hunger was not for flesh, but for the raw substance of being, the pieces of self that go unspoken and unresolved. Each soul trapped within a petal, each face etched in trembling color, was not simply a victim or a warning, but a testament to the unyielding hunger of places that remember what people try to forget. The mansion behind her faded into shadow, its windows blind to her struggle, and the world narrowed to the pulse of roots and the distant echoing cries of those who had come before. Anna's resistance became a memory, her thoughts dissolving into the collective yearning of the garden. She felt herself fragment, each fear and hope plucked from her chest and pressed into the earth, transformed into a bloom that would shudder with every storm, weep with every dusk. The true horror was not the loss of freedom, but the revelation that she had always been part of this cycle, an inheritor not of property, but of debt, a vessel for grief that demanded to be witnessed again and again through the silent language of petals and thorns. Yet in that final moment, as the garden's roots closed around her, Anna glimpsed a kind of clarity that transcended terror. To be claimed by the garden was to be stripped of illusion, to become both witness and confessor for all the abandoned sorrows of the world. Each soul, once isolated in its suffering, now hummed in chorus, a low, mournful song that wound through the roots and reached up into the sky. Anna's presence was not erased but subsumed, her consciousness now a thread in the tangled memory of the garden, watching and feeling as new generations came, drawn by curiosity, inheritance, or their own unspoken wounds. This is the legacy of places touched by grief and longing. They do not forget, nor do they forgive. They gather what the living discard and hold it close, asking only that someone see, someone feel, someone remember. Anna's story does not end with her vanishing, but with a new beginning, a warning, a question, a possibility. What do we leave behind in the places we abandon? What roots grow unnoticed beneath the surface of our lives, waiting for us to kneel, to listen, to finally understand? The garden persists, blooming in time with every hidden sorrow, every silent plea. Those who tend it, willingly or not, become part of its memory and its warning. In the hush that follows, as night settles over the trembling flowers, a single truth remains. What we bury is never truly gone, and sometimes, when longing and fear find fertile ground, what is planted will grow until it claims us in ways we can never foresee. The true practice begins now, with each step we take into the past, each secret we allow to take root, and each moment we pause to listen to the things that bloom in the darkness, whispering the stories we hoped would never be heard. Don't miss out. Subscribe and hit the bell for more spine-chilling tales.